Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
So welcome to Dominate Your Day. I have found a wonderful guy named Nick Hutchison, and he's the founder of BookThinkers. And he talks about books, and he has an agency, and he's written a book. I think you're going to enjoy him, and he just learned his strengths, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So Nick, tell the audience what you do right now. What is BookThinkers?
Sure. So my agency, BookThinkers, started back in 2017, sort of by accident, after I fell in love with the personal development book industry. But to make a long story short, today we help authors promote and market their books. We sort of live at the intersection of social media, podcasting, and books. We do short form video content, podcast booking, book reviews all over the internet, and I can't get enough of it. I mean, I genuinely believe in the power of personal development and the idea that the right book at the right time can change somebody's life.
So what brought you to write your own book, Rise of the Reader? Tell us about that.
Well, over the years of building my community, I had received hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of very similar questions. People would say, Nick, how do I choose the right book for my problem? Or Nick, how do I take effective notes while reading? Or how do I retain more from the books I'm reading because they go in one ear and out the other? Or they'd ask me about behavior change. How do you take more action on these books? And so, of course, I'm of service to my community. I'm answering everybody. I'm typing things out or sending voice notes. But I realized that I was underserving the same people that I wanted to serve because the entire reading picture, as I had defined it and executed against it, was sort of in depth and had a lot of moving parts. My process was pretty robust. And so I just decided one day, you know what, because there's no other book that I could just refer people to, which would have been a lot easier, I'm going to have to write this myself. And the process took me a couple of years, but because I had never really defined it, I just had to start by observing my own behavior from a third party perspective and saying, what the heck does Nick Hutchison do to read effectively and implement the books he reads? And so, here we are a couple of years later with Rise of the Reader, but I'm so happy that it's finally on paper for everybody.
And it just launched, right? This November 1st, is that right?
Yes. Yep. Brand new, hot off the press.
So Nick, what do you hope that people will reach to your book for when they get it? What is the outcome you're looking for?
I want people to take better action on the books that they're reading. I mean, these books condense decades of somebody else's lived experience and greatest life lessons into days of reading, right? There's a book to solve every single problem that we face as human beings. And it's accessible for $20 in a few hours of our time. My idea is that life doesn't have to be so hard. Other people already figured it out, and we can learn from their failures and their greatest life lessons. But just reading the book doesn't get us there. Taking action on what we've learned gets us there. And so I want to give people the tools to take the information and apply it directly into their life so that they can see genuine behavior change.
Well, we are in this age of self-development. There's just everything is right there at our fingertips. And it is overwhelming, I think. I mean, you think about all the information and the time to read everything. So what are some tips you have for our busy executives, for coaches that are out there and wanting to continue to develop themselves? What are some quick ways to get information from books? So I have a ton of books right now, but have I read them all? Have I gotten to read them all? No, right?
Sometimes people ask me, hey, Nick, I love reading, but I don't have time for it. What should I do? And so I love to ask them the following question. I'll say, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And that same time-pressured person who has no time for reading is well, I could read 5, right? So it's not a question of whether or not we can read. It's a question of whether or not we value reading enough to prioritize it in our calendars. once we value it enough to prioritize it, right? If our why is strong enough, we'll find time to make it happen. My recommendation for scheduling reading time in your calendar is pretty simple too. Instead of trying to find time to read, I recommend replacing a low impact activity like scrolling through social media or maybe a little bit of Netflix with reading a good book. You're replacing something that's mostly meaningless with something that has a lot of long-term meaning. And so the following math is pretty crazy. If you replace 15 minutes of your morning scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, and the first 15 minutes of your Netflix or your HBO in the evening with reading a great book, that's 30 minutes a day. Now, if you're brand new to the space, 30 minutes of reading is probably about 20 pages. If you could do that Monday through Friday, week in and week out, that's 100 pages a week. That's a book every 2 weeks, 26 books a year, just by replacing a little bit of social media and a little bit of Netflix with something more constructive. And everybody has 30 minutes. Like, we don't need to watch 3 hours of TV a day. You know what I mean?
Right. And I love the fact that you are probably Gen Z, right? Are you Gen Z or millennial?
I guess the end of the millennial. I'm 29 years young.
Yeah.
Although, if you include
Okay.
all of the books behind me, I'm thousands of years old. That's what I like to say, but I'm 29.
Okay. So you grew up, right, with social media
Mm-hmm.
and grew up on. So I love the fact that you're saying instead of scrolling, instead of watching Netflix, read. I mean, that seems counterculture to a lot of what we see out there right now in the culture, right?
Right.
So what drove you to make this happen? Because I understand our time in the green room that you were not a big reader before you got out of college, right? Or
Right. When I
into
was
this
growing
business.
up, throughout high school and most of college, I was more of the athlete stereotype, not really much of the academic. I mean, you couldn't pay me to read a book when I was younger. And, we could talk about why that is in the US public education system and all that good
Hmm.
stuff if you want. But when I was going into my senior year of college, I took an internship at a local software company. And my boss at the time, Kyle, he recognized some unfulfilled potential. He saw this young 20-year-old kind of cocky guy. And he recognized that I was driving 2 hours in the car every day, a round trip. And he recommended podcasts. And so I started listening to these shows, and so many of the successful people being interviewed, like I was telling you before, they were giving credit to the books they were reading. And they were saying, this is the book that got me, into this headspace or taught me this skill. And I just realized that if I was deliberately choosing not to read these books because I didn't think they were cool, then I was also deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And as a competitive guy, like, that's number 9 out of my 34,
Hmm.
uh, I didn't want to settle for an average life. And so I went to my local Barnes and Noble with the list that I had written down of all the books that I had heard about. And I grabbed a handful of them, and the rest is history.
So what was the one book that you always turn to that said that was the transformational moment for me? Was there one book that kind of happened
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. For me, it was book number 1. It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Ah, hmm. You hear that one a lot, right? But it really, what was it in that book that just kind of said, okay.
Well, there were a number of things. I mean, he kicks off the book by stating that the US public education system doesn't teach personal finance. And so personal
Mm,
finance and our ability to understand money is taught at home. So poor and middle class kids learn poor and middle class money habits, and rich kids learn rich money habits. So if you want to disrupt that pattern, that cycle of constantly staying poor or middle class, you have to learn from rich people, and rich people write books. And so immediately I'm
mhm,
like, wow, I didn't realize that these people who have generated massive amounts of wealth documented everything in a book that's only available for $20. Like, what a great life hack. And so I started to understand financial literacy. I started to speak the language. And very quickly, I went from like shy and insecure at school when those subjects came up to going back to school my senior year and leading those conversations. And so I just thought, well, if I could solve an insecurity that quickly, like, what other areas of my life can I improve? What other subject matter experts like the best in the world. What other people have written about health and fitness and diet and nutrition and headspace and philosophy and psychology? Like it's all accessible, you know?
Wow. And so, yeah, in that book, kind of like that catapulted you into like reading what? Were you reading 2 books a month or 2 books every 2 weeks, or what did you
Not
start
back
adding in?
then. Back then, I'm sure I sort of sprinted out of the gate, right? Like I was so excited so fast. And here's a little
Mhm.
secret too. Hopefully nobody's listening from that company, but they didn't give me a lot to do during that internship,
Ah,
but I had my own
yeah.
private office. So I would clock in because I was hourly at the time and I had to be there
Mhm.
for 8 or 9 hours a day. And I would close the door and I would finish my work in 2 or 3 hours. And then I would spend a lot of time reading these books.
Isn't that
So
great?
yeah, I read a lot of books up front. Probably slowed down for a couple of years. Today, I read a lot more than 2 books a month, but it is my full time job.
I love that. And I'm looking at your strengths because I want to talk about that a minute. So now that everybody, the listeners know your story, for those of you who know Clifton Strengths, know that when you take the assessment, you get your full 34. And we focus on the top 10. The top 5 are with you all the time. 6 through 10 are kind of like your back engine room. And you lead with your number 1 is command. And command is that person that you can just come in and take charge. So not a common talent. It's one that is probably not as common. But your number 2 is learner. So when you were rattling these off to me, I was like, oh, there it is. I mean, when you talked, my mom is 86 and she's learner, right? So she's already got a degree last year. She's constantly learning.
Oh,
It
wow,
never
that's amazing.
stops. And learning is really, Nick, it's not the end result, it's the process
Hmm.
of, oh, what am I going to get? What am I going to get? And for you, you've also got activator number 3, which is, I can see now why you're creating this whole movement around don't just read something, take action. And so you're telling them how to take action. Is that right? With all the tips in the book.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, activator just is the one in the room that's just like, let's go. Everybody's sitting around talking. Let's get things happening. Is that you? Do you find yourself that way?
Oh,
Even with your
absolutely.
agency? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a quote I stumbled across recently that uh, that shows you how much I care about this because it's one of my favorite quotes now. It's a Napoleon Hill quote, and it says, "Action is the real measure of intelligence." And I resonate with
Mm,
that because intelligence isn't sitting around and debating a subject. It's going out in the real
right.
world and taking action and looking for a result. So yeah, I'm not somebody who likes to sit there and debate. I'm somebody who likes to go and act.
Yeah, my husband's the same way, and he goes, and sometimes he's, is think do or do think do, but you get these are where you get your energy, and so you get your energy when you're making things happen, when you're learning, when you're activating, and then you've got this high responsibility followed by self assurance. Self assurance is really another one that you don't see that it's not that common, and it's just like you've got an internal compass kind of inside you that's just, I've got this. No matter, I'll risk whatever. Probably starting your business, all the things, growing an agency with, you've got 10 employees. Um, Going and asking that first, you've got several well-known people that are in your agency. How did you start? How did you go get them? Or did they come find you?
Well, it's always a combination of different things, different variables. I mean, as I started sharing the books I was reading on social media, and as I started to work with authors, I would leverage the laws of reciprocity. I would go out and I would review a book for free, and I would post about it on social media and give it a lot of love, and then I would ask. And so I think that sometimes when you provide value over and over and over again first, and
Mm-hmm.
then you go to somebody and you say, hey, I'd like to amplify this message with you even more because I care so much about it. Look at all of this proof. Somebody's more likely to do business with you. And so there are so many different strategies like that that I've implemented over the years. But thankfully, like you've highlighted, I've been fortunate enough to learn from and work with some of my all-time favorite authors over the last, I don't know, 7 years or so since starting my company.
So you've had your company for 7 years. Tell us a favorite work experience.
A
or something that
favorite.
happened.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share this. This takes a couple of minutes to tell, but I'll
That's
tell it. So I was on my honeymoon this year, and we went to a few different places in Europe, including a small city in Croatia called Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik, Croatia? Yeah. And so we are outside of the city, maybe 20, 30 minutes in a really small little community. Now, Dubrovnik's population, I think, is only 30,000, so it's small to begin with, but we're outside of that community in an even smaller, like little oceanside community. I don't know, a couple hundred people there. And my wife and I, we see this restaurant on the other side of a cove, and we want to walk over to it and have a couple of drinks after dinner. So we walk over, it takes us like 20 minutes to walk over there. And we pass a cute little restaurant on the water. And she says, hey, tomorrow night, I'd like to have dinner here. So on our walk back, let's make a reservation. So I'm like, okay, that sounds good. So we go, we have a couple of drinks, we have some fun. It's getting kind of late. We're like, oh, we need to go make that reservation. So as we head back to the restaurant on our walk back to the hotel, we show up and the restaurant's closed. Like the doors are
Mm.
closed, everything's boarded up. She's like, oh, that's a bummer. But me, the activator, the commander, whatever you want to call it, I said, no, let me just go inside, see if somebody's cleaning up. I'll just ask if we can make a reservation. So I go into this restaurant that's already closed. I find somebody who's cleaning up, washing, and I said, hey, I'd like to make a reservation for tomorrow night. Do you have any availability? And he looks up and he says, sure, I can make that happen. By the way, I'm a huge fan. And I was like, a huge fan of what? I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like, why would anybody know who I am? And he's like, BookThinkers, man, like your company, all of your book recommendations. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it.
Wow.
Your book recommendations, they've changed my life. Your author interviews, like it means so much to me, man. And he goes into some very intricate detail, like quoting things that I've said over time. It was very strange and surreal at the same time. And of course, we went back the next night and we had dinner with him, and I got to hear his whole story. And he told me about one of his favorite author of all time, like by a mile, is named MJ DeMarco. So I got MJ to sign a couple of books and send them to Croatia. It was so cool.
Oh,
It was so cool.
wow. Wow. It's kind of like when you were creating this business, you had no idea did you have a vision of where you wanted to take it? And I mean, even to have that moment where somebody recognized you and you're like, whoa, here I am in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I did have a vision and it changed. It didn't come to fruition, but what I have today is so much better. When I was first thinking of BookThinkers, I was thinking of a mobile application that could help readers retain and organize the information from the books they're reading. That never came to fruition. But the agency that I have today, I think it has so much more meaning. Like I'm so much more involved, like I'm a soldier in it. And I enjoy that so much more than just being like a technology company owner or something like that.
So when an author comes to you and they're needing help, are they generally needing help with A to Z branding to getting PR, all that? Tell us a little bit about kind of what you do in the branding world for them.
Yeah. So as the business started to grow, the most common scenario was that an author spent decades learning something very unique, providing value, years writing about it. They would put out the book and then nothing would happen. Nobody would buy it. A waste of years and years and years of effort and a lot of money. And so they'd come to us and they'd say, hey, can you help me get the word out there a little bit? So that's sort of where our original foothold started. Then we started to work with some publishers, trying to get earlier in the process, like, hey, you're going to regret not putting in the work to get more promotion and marketing in advance of your book launch. You don't want to regret it. So today, yes, we help authors with all sorts of things, from their overall branding to their online presence, mostly their social media presence. We can help them create content for all the major socials related to their book and their business. A lot of the authors that we work with, their book is a lead mechanism for some type of complementary product or service, like coaching, consulting, speaking, courses. Doesn't always have to be, and that doesn't need to be the primary motive, right? These people want to help their readers, but it's nice to be able to reinvest money back into the book, and normally that money doesn't come directly from the book.
Sure. And you always hear, I mean, I know when I went through publishing my book, it was like, oh my gosh, you've got to be the marketer, the brander, the financier. You've got
Yeah.
to do it all. And it is, there's not anybody out there, I think, that does what you do that I've seen in a way that you do it. So do you have a fun, just kind of story of somebody you helped and how their book took off, or, somebody that you can share
Oh
their
yeah, of
story?
course. Of course. Yeah. And that was probably your original question when I told you the whole thing about Croatia,
No,
but
I always because let's take that story you told about Croatia, because there was your strengths. Um, I heard huge, the relator, I heard huge significance. So you have significance number 7, and people with high significance want to make a difference. They want to make a mark on this world. And the fact that you were in Croatia, in this little teeny tiny town, and that somebody knew you was, oh my gosh, I think we're making a difference. That this guy who was washing dishes, I guess, or I don't know what his role was in the restaurant, that you were able to make a difference in his life. So there
yes.
it is. And it's
Yes.
always a story. It's something I always like to ask, because in this story we hear stuff. Now I want to hear, okay, a story of somebody that you basically worked with that came in and was like, I got to, this book's not, help me get to where I need to be. And just a story that might shed a light on kind of how you made a difference in somebody's actual launch of their book.
Yeah, of course. So I'll tell the story of Ken Rusk, Rusk. He's the author of a book titled Blue Collar Cash. Ken is from
Okay.
Toledo, Ohio, runs a business in the blue collar space. He employs a couple hundred people, right? So it's a big business that he started from scratch. And Ken's a little bit older now. He's sort of moving out of the day-to-day operations of the business, and he wants to go out there and make an impact. So his book launches. It has some short-term success, but it kind of falls off. And so Ken approaches us about a year after the launch, and we start talking about his book, Blue Collar Cash. Ken is an advocate for alternatives to college. He doesn't think college has to be the solution for everybody. So he's helping people who are in the military, servicemen and women, people who work blue collar trades. He's got some great stats like for every 10 electricians and plumbers retiring today in the US, only 5 are getting into the field. And
Mm.
so where supply is low, but demand is high, you can make a lot of money. So he's trying to encourage
Mhm.
people to get into blue collar trades. He cares so much about the book, but it's not really selling a ton of copies. So we get in behind the brand and we start to help Ken create content for social media. And at the time that we started, Ken didn't have much of a social media presence. So we go out to Toledo, Ohio. We start to film some video content for Ken where we really pull the messaging out. We're putting him on camera. He's talking directly to the audience. And the first batch of videos is great. I mean, he's starting to grow a social media presence. But what we're looking for is what 20% of videos that we create are outperforming the other 80%. Because it's sort of a
Mhm.
guess during the first experience with an author, but then we get some good data. So now we go and we film with Ken a second time. And we say, hey, Ken, people are really resonating with this type of message. I think if we create a bunch more content like this, we'll have a viral moment. Like you'll break the internet if we can nail this thing. So I think it was maybe 3 months ago now, 4 months ago, Ken had a video that within, I think, the first day, it had 1 million views on Instagram and another
Oh my
1 million views on
goodness.
TikTok. Since then, it's continued to grow. I think he's probably closer to 20 million views now between the two platforms on one of his videos, which has led to amazing exposure, a ton of course sales, book sales, inbound interview requests. In fact, today I think Ken is being interviewed in New York City on Fox for something. And it's just like that moment can do so much for you. And then other pages start to pick up your content too because they want to repost it. They know it goes viral. And so, like
Mhm.
today, Wealth, the Instagram page Wealth, posted something about Ken. And after 2 hours, it had like 40,000 likes. And again,
My
this
God.
is just getting that flywheel moving. And so
Mhm.
that's the story that came to mind when you asked me about it.
Yeah. So you know what's so interesting, Nick, that I heard there in this story about Ken, and in the story about why you started your bookbinders, is really, or book thinkers, is really the fact that you help bring out out of the book or out of the person? What needs to be told?
Yeah. The right book at the right time can change your life, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to
Yeah.
help people get that message out there.
And now helping with the authors do that. So that's really cool. So, Nick, as we get ready to close down, is there anything that I didn't ask you or anything that's coming up for you right now that you want to share with the audience as they think they might be wanting to be an author in the future? They might be working on their personal brand. They might be thinking, oh my gosh, I love personal development. I didn't know I should be, getting myself to disciplining myself to read just 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening. Anything else that you want to share with them today?
You know what? I have so much to say about so many different areas of life, but I'll wrap with this. Life doesn't have to be so hard.
Mm,
People have figured out how to live effectively, and you can read these books, whether it's about branding or personal development or anything, or writing your own book. There are so many great
mhm,
resources for that too. Other people have figured
mhm.
out how to live a great life, and you can read and implement what they've taught you into your own life and live a good life too. Today I genuinely enjoy the passage of time. I love my life. I love my business. I love what I do. I love my wife. I love everything. And I think that's accessible. I think it is for everybody. It just takes a little bit of work, right? And reading is not fun, but I do want to make reading fun again. I want people to read with purpose, read with intention, read to solve problems, to build skills, to satisfy curiosity. And again, that message of like the right book at the right time can change everything for you.
So, I have a quick question.
Hit
How
me.
many books did you read on marriage before you got married?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what. My wife and I were in a long car ride one time, and together we listened to the five love languages,
Mm,
and we would pause and have long conversations about it. And it's like, there I've read other books, one Relationship
mhm,
Crit by Catherine Gordon and stuff like that. But I think it's important to involve your partner in conversations
mhm.
around personal development and around relationship building and stuff like that. So yeah, I did
Yeah.
take the initiative to say, hey, I think we should listen to this,
Yeah.
but it's paid dividends because I know what her love languages are and she knows what mine are, and we can act, in each other's best benefit.
That's right. And so congratulations on your marriage. What
Thank
is it, a
you.
year ago or within this year?
Yeah, this year, May. We got married in May.
May. Okay. Well, congrats. And I've been married a long time and there's ups and downs, but I think the key is staying connected daily. And so whatever you can do to do that, and your love languages will change over time. So check in regularly on that and get to know her strengths too. That's going to really help you.
Yes, I will
So
have her. I will have her go through this since I
yeah.
just went through it. I think like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it's new.
And your team too, because that's what we love, putting everybody in a team grid and seeing where their strengths are as a team. And then everybody feels seen, valued, and that, they're a part, they're getting called on for their unique talent. So congrats to you. Congrats on
Thank
the
you.
book launch. You've had a banner year, it sounds like, and look forward to following you. How can our guests and listeners follow you, or what's the best way to reach you?
Well, if anybody's been listening or watching today and they're like, yeah, this reading thing sounds interesting, but none of the books mentioned resonate with me, shoot me a direct message on Instagram at BookThinkers. That's our main community. And just tell me about a problem you're facing or a skill you want to develop or an area of life that you're curious to learn more about. And I'll provide a custom book recommendation to you. So it's one of my favorite
Ah,
things to do, to be like a book matchmaker. And that's
ooh.
Book Thinkers on Instagram. And then from there are links in that bio to everything else that I've got going on.
Well, you're going to have a lot of people reach out because a lot of our people that know their strengths, a lot of them have learner. So
Oh,
guarantee
good.
you're going to you're going to get it. So thank you so much, Nick, for being with us today, and best to you. And I cannot wait to see what you're going to do 5 years from now, looking at these strengths and looking at what you've done so far. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your talent with us.
Yeah, great to meet you today. And it was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to dominate your day wherever you listen.